All right. You know how sometimes in politics you get these head-scratching moments? Well, buckle up, because we're diving into one of those today. Kamala Harris getting support from some big Republicans. And not just any Republicans. We're talking Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney. It's wild.
Yeah, and what's really interesting here is this isn't just some political stunt. This alliance, it kind of gives us a glimpse behind the curtain, right? Hints at how power might be shifting within both the Democrats and the Republicans. And honestly, it could reshape how the U.S. approaches foreign policy.
This isn't just some backroom deal either. Harris and Liz Cheney are going on a 3-state tour together to rally voters. And get this, Sarah Longwell, she's a Republican strategist, and Charlie Sykes, the conservative radio host who turned on Trump. They're moderating these events.
Wow. Talk about sending a message. It seems like Harris is making a beeline for Republicans who are feeling disillusioned with their party's direction, especially those who broke from Trump.
Yeah, it's a bold strategy. You got to remember Liz Cheney's history with the GOP. She was practically forced out of the House for calling out Trump and her part in the January 6th investigations.
Yeah.
And then she comes out and publicly endorses Harris for president.
Oh, and don't forget her father, Dick Cheney, endorsed Harris too. It makes you wonder if this points to a bigger crack within the Republican Party. On one side, you've got the die-hard Trump supporters. Then you have this more traditional conservative base. Are they actually warming up to Harris? It's possible.
Okay, but what's the common thread here? What are they agreeing on? They don't exactly see eye to eye on every issue.
And that's where things get really interesting, especially when you follow the money. One article we looked at suggested that the Democratic Party's funding sources are completely different than they used to be. Back in the day, they relied heavily on labor unions, grassroots movements, that kind of thing. But now, it's Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and these massive investment firms like BlackRock pouring in money.
BlackRock, that's the company that manages, what, trillions of dollars in assets.
Exactly. And these donors, their priority is global financial stability and a really strong U.S. presence on the world stage. And that aligns almost perfectly with how the Cheneys see the world, a strong military and active foreign policy.
So we're essentially talking about corporate money-shaping policy. But how does that actually work in practice? What issues are driving this potential realignment?
The articles we read zeroed in on two major foreign policy issues, the Ukraine conflict and the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Okay, let's start with Ukraine. The Biden-Harris administration has backed Ukraine with military and financial aid since the war began. What's the connection to the Cheneys in all of this?
It goes beyond just supporting Ukraine. It's really about the U.S. being the dominant force globally. It's like this echo of the Cheney doctrine, the idea that U.S. leadership is vital for maintaining a world order that benefits Western interests.
So it's less about pushing back against Russia and more about flexing American muscle on the world stage.
It's kind of a big shift, right? The Democrats have always been seen as more into diplomacy, less into using military force. But this support for Ukraine, even though they frame it as, you know, defending democracy, it does align with that more interventionist approach. It's like remembering the Cheney era when using military strength to achieve goals was the name of the game.
Yeah, a far cry from those anti-war protest days.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Ukraine. But what about Israel-Palestine? That's another one of those super sensitive areas where we see this unexpected dynamic playing out.
Totally. The Biden-Harris administration has basically stuck with the U.S.'s longstanding support for Israel, especially when it comes to self-defense. But this has ruffled some feathers, you know. You've got the progressive wing of the Democratic Party who are becoming more and more vocal. They're really concerned about human rights in Gaza, and they're pushing for the U.S. to be more even-handed in their approach.
So Harris is walking this tightrope, trying to keep everyone happy.
Which is impossible. And this is where those big corporate interests, BlackRock in particular, become even more significant. Think about it. BlackRock is this massive global investor. They want stability, especially in the Middle East, and a strong U.S.-Israel relationship. They see that as key to keeping things stable.
Hold on, I just want to make sure I'm following you. Are you saying that her stance on Israel-Palestine could actually be influenced by the agendas of these mega donors?
It's a question the article raises, and it's a valid one. These donors, they have a ton of influence. And sometimes, yeah, geopolitical stability and their own economic interests might trump, no pun intended, a more humanitarian approach.
I've had to be honest, that's kind of unsettling. It makes you wonder if regular people's concerns like human rights violations or the cost of military intervention even register when these power players are making deals.
It's a concern the article brings up, and it's a big one. When corporate interests might be steering foreign policy, it definitely raises some red flags about who's really being represented in a democracy.
So let's recap. We're looking at this potential Harris-Cheney alliance. It seems to be fueled by corporate money and this shared vision of the U.S. as the world's dominant power. But what does that mean down the line for U.S. politics?
Well, if this trend continues, the traditional left-right divide, it might not be so clear-cut anymore. It could be that we're moving towards this new political landscape. And in this landscape, maintaining the U.S.'s global influence, especially in places that are important for, say, financial markets, becomes more important than sticking to the traditional party lines.
So instead of Democrats versus Republicans, it becomes globalists versus .who. Who's left to challenge this new world order? And who's speaking for the average person if both parties are basically answering to these global interests?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This evolving political scene could give rise to totally new movements, new voices who will challenge the way things are done and offer alternative visions for what America's role in the world should be.
We've been talking a lot about the Cheneys and corporate money, but let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier. Those upcoming events with Liz Cheney, they've got some pretty interesting moderators lined up. Tell me more about Sarah Longwell and Charlie Sykes. What do they bring to the table?
Yeah, it's an intriguing choice, that's for sure. Longwell, she's been a GOP strategist for a long time. She actually founded the Republican Accountability Project, so she seems pretty set on holding those who were part of the January 6th attack accountable.
So definitely not on board with Trump. And Sykes. He comes from the conservative media world, am I right?
Yep. He was a major voice in conservative media, but he's become a pretty vocal critic of Trump and the direction he's taken the party. I mean, he actually endorsed Harris, said it's not enough to just be anti-Trump. You have to support an alternative. That's a pretty big statement.
Wow. It's almost like they're saying, listen, we're conservatives, but we think Harris is the better option, even if she is a Democrat.
Right. It seems like by appearing at these events with Cheney, they're hoping to appeal to Republicans who are disillusioned. Show them there's another way. It's a potential political realignment.
These events are going to be fascinating to watch, that's for sure. It's going to be really telling to see how the Republican base reacts. Will this alliance hold up when the cameras aren't rolling?
Totally. And on the flip side, will Democrats buy it? How will the more progressive wing of the party react to this potential shift, especially when it comes to foreign policy and corporate influence? I definitely think there's potential for some pushback there.
It's like we're watching a political earthquake happen in slow motion. Who knows what the landscape will look like when the dust settles? This whole thing started with an endorsement, and now we're talking about a complete reshuffling of alliances, corporate power plays, and the future of U.S. foreign policy. It's crazy, right? We started with this endorsement, and now it's like we've fallen down this rabbit hole of shifting alliances and big money pulling strings. And then there's the whole question of what it means for how the U.S. acts on the world stage. It's a lot.
It really highlights how interconnected everything is, you know? Like this Cheney endorsement of Harris, it's like a tiny crack that suddenly reveals this whole hidden network of power and influence shaping American politics.
It's true. It reminds us that we can't just skim the headlines. We've got to dig deeper, try to figure out everyone's motives, see who's aligning with who, and understand what's at stake.
Exactly. And that's what makes this alliance so fascinating and honestly potentially game-changing. It goes way beyond personality clashes or party labels. What we're really talking about is a fundamental shift in power and priorities. And it's happening right at the core of the American political system.
And with 2024 right around the corner, watching this unfold is going to be crucial. Will this alliance last? Will voters buy it? What happens to the Democratic and Republican parties as we know them? And what about America's role in the world? What does that even look like in 10 years, 20 years?
These are the big questions we all need to be asking as we try to make sense of a political landscape that just keeps getting more and more complicated. This whole Harris and Cheney thing, it's just the tip of the iceberg. We're going to see some major shifts in the years to come.
No doubt. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. This deep dive into Kamala Harris, the Cheneys, and, well, the future of American politics has been a wild ride. I don't know about you, but it definitely makes me wonder if these old categories of left and right even mean anything anymore, especially with all these global power dynamics at play.
It's a lot to process. It really underscores how important it is to stay informed, keep asking the tough questions, and hold our leaders accountable no matter who they are.
Couldn't agree more. At the end of the day, a well-informed public is the strongest defense against threats to democracy, whether they come from inside our own borders or from somewhere else entirely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, the more informed we are, the better equipped we are to navigate this complex world.